everyone, and welcome to Your Money Story. I'm your host, Renita Young, and today we're going to talk about creating generational wealth in the Latinx community. And so to do that, I'm going to bring on Jully-Alma Taveras. She is the creator of Investing Latina, and she's the founder of the Investing Workshop. So in honor of the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month, I want to have this conversation. And hang on for a moment. Let me grab Julie.
Hi,
Hi, how are
I'm
you?
doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. I had a similar conversation in February about Black History Month, during Black History Month, about generational wealth in the Black community. And so I thought this would be a really good topic to explore. But welcome. A
Thank you
lot
so
of
much. I'm
people,
happy to be here and I'm
yeah,
excited to talk money because, as we know, it's such an important element of how we live full lives. So, thank you for having me.
absolutely. You are most welcome. So you grew up in New York here.
Yes.
You first heard about investing in a retirement account when you were 19 years old at your part-time job. So, but take us back to your childhood years. How did you relate to money? Growing up, what was your relationship like with money?
Yes. So growing up, it was really interesting because I grew up hearing a lot of things that perhaps a lot of immigrant children heard. Growing up, we heard things around the house like, "Oh, we can't afford that," or "Where do you think money grows? Do you think it grows on trees?" And so there were a lot of these sort of comments and messaging that we received from our parents, and it really had a lot to do with being frugal and making do with what we had. And because we're an immigrant family, I came here with my parents when I was 4 years old from the Dominican Republic. There was a lot of that. They weren't able to get jobs right away when we arrived here because the education that they received in the Dominican Republic really didn't stand for much here. So
Hmm.
it was a lot about how can we save money? How can we cut back on expenses? And that was what I remember a lot from my younger years. As we developed and my parents started businesses here in America, in New York, specifically, actually in the Bronx specifically, then
Hmm.
things started to change a little bit. We saw more money coming in. And then I started to get exposure to what my parents thought about investing in our family and in their own business. And that was really great exposure for me. I didn't
Okay.
get exposure to the stock market through my parents, but I did get a lot of exposure of what it means to work really hard. They worked 16-hour days
Hmm.
and how that really played an effect on how we took care of our families.
I mean, it sounds like it created a good foundation for what you do today. You learned investing in families, investing in culture, investing in communities through small businesses. But you did learn how to invest in the stock market. And so
Yeah.
take me to that shift when you learned that, oh, compounding interest is a
I
thing.
know. It's like the best thing because it really requires such little effort. And this is part of what I love to share and teach people, especially within the Hispanic community, because I feel like many of my peers did grow up with that same environment where it was just like we were afraid of the financial systems. And because this
Yeah.
might have not been our home country, or perhaps maybe they were even just first gen, it's not something that we kind of heard around the house at the dinner table. So when I started learning about it and when I saw that I was putting money in, I actually coincidentally started investing when we were in our last recession in
Mm,
2008. So
okay.
without knowing, was really investing at the bottom of the market. And it was something that I saw as I put money in and I saw it grow. I'm like, wait a second. I'm not putting much money in. I was only putting in $50 a month because I was working part time. It was just something.
Okay.
And then I saw it grow and I'm like, wait a second. Even though I had debt, like I was studying in school, I had some student loans, I saw
Hmm.
this money grow and it really inspired me to learn more and to dig in further. And that was really kind of where my interest started growing. And it was the
Hmm.
best thing ever because I realized that it took very little effort. I just had to contribute and I had to let the stock market do its thing. And that's something that I really love to share with people.
Absolutely. And we know that you also share that starting early is the key. Now, I'm going
Yes.
to follow back up with that a little bit later. But you believe, and many believe, a lot of people believe, building generational wealth really is, it should be a priority.
Yes.
And so investing, you say, is a huge part of that, of course. And so I just want to read off a couple of stats that I saw in 2019. Just 31% of Latinos contributed to an employer-sponsored retirement plan. And I know that you're hoping to help change that statistic. And so first, a lot of things that you talk about surround the feeling of not having enough to invest. So let's explore that first, and then we'll get to the lessons.
Sure. And yes, and this is actually the reason why I go to corporations and I have talks and I give investing workshops at corporations, because sometimes we're caught up with the work that we have to do and we're not thinking about what are the benefits that we have in our company. And so a lot of people disregard that. I know that I've heard many stories of people that are like, oh my God, I've been working at my company for 5 years and I haven't invested. I haven't taken advantage of the 401k. Where do I start? And really, I love to tell people, it really doesn't matter how much you're making. You want to just put a small percentage, whatever it is that you can, and you want to set yearly goals. For example, a lot of people like to think of investing into the 401k as a percentage, like 4%, 5%. I really love to think about it in whole dollars. I want you to know exactly how much you're investing per month. And then on top of that, I want you to know how much you're investing per year. So if this year, all you can do is $1,000 for the full year, then next year, your goal is to increase that, maybe do $1,500, whatever you can. So it really starts small. As I mentioned earlier, I bring back my story of the $50 because who would have thought that my $50 would have become a 6-figure portfolio? And by the time I retire, it's going to be $1 million portfolio. So you just don't know until you really get started. So I always encourage people, no matter what you do, get started. That being said, if you don't have access to a 401k, you can open an individual retirement account. You could do it on your own, because that's something that in our community, like my parents, they were self-employed. They didn't have a corporation or access to a 401k. People in those situations can just open one on their own. And it's very simple. Before, the barrier to entry was bigger. Like you needed $1,000, you needed $2,000. And just to give you a reference, when we first started with the stock market, to buy one stock, it cost $2,000 to buy it, just to access it. That was the fee to buy a stock, regardless of what the stock costs. Now there is no such thing. We have 0%, we have $0 fees to invest, buy stocks, and you can also buy stocks or funds that cost even starting at $10. So it really is an awesome opportunity. As we've developed over the years, there's more opportunity to get into the market, even if you don't have very much to start with, because you will down the line.
For those who would want to invest in markets without a 401k, for instance, what kind of stocks do you suggest? Maybe not specific stocks, but a lot of people suggest first-time investors do index funds or exchange traded funds. What's your suggestion for the novice investor?
So when you're getting started, you really want to think about, okay, what is the foundation to my house? You don't want to think about the roof before you think about the foundation, the basement. You want to get that basement built out. And in that basement, instead of having to think about what are the details, what are the specifics, it's really cinder blocks. It's cinder blocks. You want to think of investing into those cinder blocks. And that's what index funds are, because it gives you a little bit of everything. When you buy an index fund, you're getting exposure to the full market. So your foundation should be the entire market. Then as you build that house up, you can think of different ways. You can explore individual stocks. You can do more research in specific sectors. Right now, the technology sector is blowing up. You know, in the next 3 to 5 years, things are going to look very, very different. And it's going to look more like technology. So those are, when we have those kind of opportunities, when we're in that sort of state or current event state, you want to think about those opportunities, but only after you've developed a really strong foundation. I had a student challenge me and tell me, how much is that strong foundation? And I had to think about it for a second. I'm like, that's a great question. And the number that I really kind of came up with was $30,000. If you can set a foundation of full index funds or exchange traded funds, anything that's a fund that's going to give you a lot of different diversified exposure without requiring a lot of mental capacity to make individual decisions, you're going to be in a good place where you're going to have a great foundation.
Okay, all right. And so we are talking about fostering generational wealth in the Hispanic and the Latinx community. And so one of those ways you say education on investing.
Yes.
And then something else you say is that something very cultural within the
Yes.
community is prioritizing home ownership as a primary form of investing. Tell me why that is, why you believe that's problematic to not prioritizing investing.
Yes, I think that in our community, from my experience, of course, because our community is very diverse and people grow up with very different perspectives
Hmm.
within their family structures. But from my experience, we do put a lot of emphasis on investing into real estate. But truly, the investing part is just ownership of real estate, ownership in a primary residence, which really can cost a lot of money aside from the ticket price that you see on a home. So for me, I think it's really important that we talk about different ways and make sure that we're doing things congruently. You want to, of course, save for that house. You want to put your down payment together, whether that be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. If you live in a high cost city, it could be even more. But you want to work on that while also diversifying and going into the stock market. That's going to give you more exposure. And with that opportunity that you're doing of investing in the stock market and investing into 401k accounts or even Roth IRA accounts, you can actually create a faster route to buying property because there are ways that we can use those accounts to get
Hmm.
into our first home. So I really like to think of doing them together and then having a really long-term plan, because of course it's wonderful and it's necessary that we have a roof over our heads when we're getting older and we're retiring, but it's also important that we have cash flow coming in, and ultimately the
Hmm.
stock market is going to create that cash flow that you do not have to work for.
One person asks, which apps do you use to invest?
Yes. Okay. So I love all of the discount brokers. So the discount brokers came about when, remember that I mentioned that it cost $2,000 to get into a stock in money back then. So when
Hmm.
discount brokers like Vanguard and Fidelity came around, and even TD Ameritrade, they decided that they weren't going to charge those exorbitant fees. And so I
Hmm.
really recommend those places. They've been around for a handful of decades now, and they're really reliable. They have trillions of dollars in assets. They have a lot of diversified funds that you can explore. So I like to recommend those. And of course,
Hmm.
they now have apps. Then that's one thing, the discount brokers. In the
Okay.
past 5 years, we've had an explosion of straight direct to consumer apps. And that
Okay.
includes like Robinhood, and it includes one that I love, SoFi. Those are all apps, and even Ellevest, which is a woman-owned company. Really
Hmm.
amazing way to get right into the stock market and making it very simple for everyone. So those are some that you can use, but it's important that you understand the pros and cons. When you're going to an app, it's something that may not give you as much flexibility. Some of
Hmm.
these apps will not offer retirement accounts. So
Right.
keep that in mind. And when you're building wealth, when we're talking about generational wealth for the Hispanic community, we really want to think long term. We really want to think, how do we establish
Hmm.
security for our retirement? And then once we have that foundation and that security, we can think about, okay, let's build wealth. Let's explore other things.
Hmm. And maybe even helping cover your parents. You
Yeah.
know, we run into a lot of intergenerational homes in the community, and a lot of people who may have to care for their parents at some point. You know, I had someone else on my show a few months ago who I had never heard of this concept of creating an emergency fund for your family. But I thought it was really interesting and really smart because you may have family members who have something going on. They might need help every once in a while. You want to be able to help them, but not at the expense of your own day to day, you know, expenses, I should say.
And
So
that's
yeah.
very much a cultural thing. Like, we
Hmm.
want to take care of our family.
Yeah.
My parents put us, our, and my two siblings, they put me and my two siblings ahead of
Hmm.
themselves. They wanted to do everything for us, put us through school, take care of us, give us the things that we wanted.
Yeah.
But really, they deprioritized themselves. And that means that they have to work longer, and then when something like that happens, you're working longer and still possibly working at the stagnant rate that we see, which is
Hmm.
an issue, an economic issue that we all face. Then it
Right.
becomes challenging. And then that's when children have to step up and also be a support and also provide cash flow for them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all about establishing your streams of income and establishing cash flow, not only for millennials right now, but as we get to retirement, which is going to come in a couple of decades. But as we
Yeah.
grow, we always want to be able to explore what are different streams of income that we can use so we
Mm-hmm.
don't have to depend on our family members.
And don't have to work for it dollar
Exactly.
for dollar, you know? And so, lastly, the three major ways you say to invest, we said two of them: stock market, real estate, business. Were you
Yes.
talking about entrepreneurship?
Yes, for sure. So when you're an entrepreneur, it can be a struggle because you're starting something, you may not be making a lot of money. And I've
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of students that have transitioned last year from full-time corporate jobs to wanting to start their own business and
Right.
follow their passions. I think especially in the millennial age group, that's something that's happening
Mm-hmm.
in a big way. And so you have to kind of figure out, okay, how am I making it happen? How can I adjust my budget, but how can I still make it happen and invest into myself, invest into my potential, because that potential is really what's going to give you those big returns. But always along
Mm-hmm.
the way, as I mentioned earlier, no matter how much you're making, you should know exactly off the top of your head every year how much you make, how much you spend, and how much you invest. If you
Okay.
know those three numbers the same way that we're very familiar with knowing our salary off the top of our heads, you're going to position yourself where you are building generational wealth for you, for your children, and for your family.
Okay. And lastly, investing early, we know is the best thing to do. But what about the 30 somethings who are just getting started?
Oh my gosh, you have so much time. So much time. Do not worry about it because the market is going to be the market. The market is going to work for you. And something that's really important to understand, especially if you're starting what you might think is later, I truly don't believe in that. I know
Hmm.
students that start in their 50s, they're super excited and they see the opportunity that there is in the stock market. There is no such thing as starting too late. It's just going to look different for you. You're just going to establish a portfolio that's going to have a certain amount of money. You're going to
Hmm.
establish a certain amount of passive income, but you will have to think of other ways as well. So there is no such thing as starting too late, but you want to build the same foundation. You want to start with the total market and then
Hmm.
work your way up. The numbers can vary. Maybe you want to work on, instead of that $30,000 foundation, maybe your foundation looks like maybe $10,000, and then you can explore other options. Something that I want to mention very quickly is the
Okay.
opportunity to invest into crypto. There's a lot going on in this space. There are a lot of changes. There's a lot of adaptation to it. So it's something that you can look into, and and really investing into these things that are high growth is going to be the opportunity to close that Hispanic wealth gap.
Hmm. Thank you so much. I think that's a brilliant place to leave it. I want to continue this conversation one day because I think it's so important. And especially as I dive deeper into closing the wealth gap,
Yes.
into that topic. But thank you so much for joining us, Jully. Everyone, if you'd like to learn more about Jully Investing Latina or the Investing Workshop, head on over to Investing Latina or the Investing Workshop, which will give you links to everything else that Jully is a part of. And thank you so much for being here, Jully. And I
Thank
hope
you
you
so
have
much, Renita. Thank you for your work and for sharing all of this message because it's so important for all of our communities.
absolutely, absolutely agree. You have a lovely day.
You too. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.